Hey everybody, welcome back to Human Flourishing. So last week I watched an interview on YouTube between Pete Docter and Mike Birbiglia. And it's really a shame because this video only has 19,000 views. And I say that's a shame because I wish more people would watch this conversation, because honestly, it's the most encouraging conversation that I've seen in years.
There was one time that, and it wasn't just me, but we gave notes and the director walked out and got in his car and drove home and said, "I don't think I'm ever coming back."
Did he come back?
He did, yes. He did. But that's
a hard day.
That was a hard day.
Wow.
I'd say it's the most encouraging conversation I've seen in years because it hit on this really potent point. True excellence requires sacrifice. Duh, you might say, but hold on with me for a second. Because how often do we in our everyday lives repeat mantras and sayings without actually internalizing what those mantras or sayings actually mean when the rubber meets the road?
It almost feels like it's engineered to find your weak spots and pick at them.
Say more about that.
Well, like if you have trouble making decisions, the whole process is about decisions. Oh boy, okay, that's awful. If you feel insecure, the whole process is going to make you feel more insecure.
Right.
If you're a private person, we're going to probe in because the story itself is going to expose all the things you don't want to talk about in yourself. You know, so it's I watch it every time, and I warn new directors coming in. It's like, just so you know, this isn't intentional, but this process is going to expose your weak underbelly for everybody, and we're all going to be talking about it. So you just have to be comfortable with that.
We're all going to be talking about it.
It's true.
I think that really drives the knife in.
It's true.
We're all going to be talking about it over lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to this phrase that you often hear, that true excellence requires sacrifice. And yet, most people aren't actually excellent. And I can hear you saying, "Oh, come on, don't be so critical." Like, people are trying their best. But look, I don't mean any disrespect. I just literally mean, like, by definition, most people in society aren't excellent. Because excellent means rising above the norm. If you look at Webster's dictionary, they describe excellence as first class or superior. This idea that there's like a hierarchy. And I think the idea is that excellence can only exist because there's something less than excellent to contrast it. And if you think about it in most measurable contexts, you know, whether it's sports or academics or business, excellence really usually refers to only the top 10%, which literally means that 90% of people aren't operating at that level. So when the majority of people talk about excellence, I think we have to admit that the majority of people are talking about something that they haven't actually experienced or achieved, which led me down a rabbit trail and led me to this thought, you know, why do we look for advice among the 90% of people when we should be looking for advice from the people that are already in that 10%? I mean, you wouldn't go talking to a Monday morning quarterback at the water cooler for help to design a world-class football playbook. You go talk to Tom Brady. So why do we take cues from people around us, whether it's online or in offices or at dinner parties, about what makes a great career or business or life? Shouldn't we be listening to the actual greats, the people who are actually accomplishing excellence? And that brings me back to this conversation between Pete Docter and Mike Birbiglia. So in this conversation with Mike, Pete, who's this brilliant director at Pixar, behind the movies like Monsters, Inc. and Up and Inside Out, he said something that gave me pause. And I actually paused it and like rewound the video and rewatched this section a couple times. But he said something to the effect that getting notes himself, he gives himself a day to just wallow in self-pity. And I was like, wait.
So it's building up to the screening, and you're like, this is going to kill. This is going to get us, you know, everyone's going to lift us on their shoulders.
They'll love us forever.
And then they're like, well, I have some notes. And that's not what you want to hear. And then for me, I usually give myself a day to just wallow in my own self-pity.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens anyway.
Yeah.
And then after that, you start to go like, well, what if we did do that? And then you start to get excited again.
Pete Docter, this incredible director at Pixar, wallows in self-pity. The guy who made Up.
I usually give myself a day to just wallow in my own self-pity.
Yeah.
And yet later, he describes even further how every Pixar movie requires hundreds of artists to endure 3 a.m. nights and creative crises and just like sheer exhaustion. You know, these kind of like month-long stretches or multi-month stretches where working through the night is more common than a normal 9 to 5. And at that moment, I thought, hold up, like Pixar, this 30-year, best in the world animation studio, they still haven't figured out how to make excellent films without pain and sacrifice and emotional turmoil. And if they haven't cracked the code, what makes you or me think that we can find a shortcut or that we can do it without the pain? And oddly, that felt really freeing. Because once I started seeing this clearly, I started to see the same principle everywhere. In a different interview between Jimmy Donaldson, who's Mr. Beast, and Stephen Bartlett from Diary of a CEO, they describe their lives, jetting from Egypt to Los Angeles for a shoot and driving to North Hollywood that same day for a midnight interview. And then after the interview, sleeping on planes and filming into the early hours on different shoots, and just this constant pace that I think to a normal person sounds insane. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's only insane for the people who aren't trying to build a world-changing empire or to create world-changing impact. And maybe that's okay. I mean, we don't all need to adopt the lifestyle of Mr. Beast or a Pixar animator or Pete Docter, but we do have to acknowledge the trade-offs. Because I don't think excellence comes cheap. And if you truly want to reach the top 10% in your field, whether it's design or ministry or filmmaking or nonprofit leadership or entrepreneurship or I think anything, you need to count the cost. And that's something that a friend of mine has been saying for months now. You have to count the cost. The cost of our competing responsibilities to our teams, our families, our clients, and I think even to our own soul. And I think we have to ask ourselves, the truth, what are we trying to accomplish with our lives? And are we willing to make the necessary sacrifices to accomplish those goals? I actually initially planned to end this video with that idea, with that point, but I started talking with my wife, Yetta, and she was like, man, you should really talk about what this looks like in practice. Because I think oftentimes the sacrifice that most of us don't want to make for personal comfort and enjoyment is often actually the main sacrifice we have to make if we want to achieve any kind of excellence. A friend of mine, and actually my first landlord, said one time, you have to triage your life's responsibilities. And I think unless you're a really rare exception, your life probably involves more than just one priority or responsibility. For me, it's my family, my business, and then my health, which for me means physical, mental, and spiritual. And you'll notice that hanging with the guys at the bar doesn't make it onto that list. It's taken me decades of focus to at least try to figure out how to allocate time between these three areas of family, business, and health. And I don't do it perfectly, but a business coach of mine drilled into my mind this idea of progress over perfection. I'm happy to share my schedule if you're interested in seeing how I try to find that progress towards excellence. But the point is really this, and I think this is Yetta's main insight. And it's that sacrifice doesn't mean giving up everything for just one thing. But it does mean choosing the few plates that are spinning that you refuse to let drop, and being willing to sacrifice everything else to keep those few plates spinning. Heck, when I actually wrote out this script for this video, it was 11 p.m. on a Friday night because I committed at the beginning of this year to send out newsletters and to produce podcasts at least twice a month. And I was on set all week for 14-hour days and had multiple deliverables in post-production with the post team. But that's what when the rubber meets the road looks like for me right now. And so I would just ask, what does the rubber meeting the road look like for you? If you're wanting to build the most impactful nonprofit in your space, what are the current leaders in that space sacrificing to be there? If I want to build the most influential film studio of the 21st century, what are the leading film studios and pioneers in filmmaking giving up to be the current leaders at that level? And I think fundamentally, are we matching the commitment of those who are currently the most excellent in whatever our area of pursuit is? And if the answer is yes or no, that's honestly not as important as whether or not we're asking that question in the first place. Because that's a deeply personal question and a deeply personal set of answers, and all of us have to answer that for ourselves. But we have to ask the question. Because excellence, I think, only begins with a clear-eyed understanding of what it costs to actually be excellent. And I think once you see that, you can't unsee it. So, here's to excellence. Here's to human flourishing. See you next time.